After making the decision to marry my partner, Ethan, I visited his family's home to introduce myself. However, I was met with rejection from all of his relatives, who made it clear that they wanted nothing to do with me. It seemed that their upbringing, which focused on their physical appearance, had made them harsh and jealous towards anyone who had something they did not possess. Unfortunately, I became the target of their envy. Even my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, who should have been supportive, joined in the mistreatment. My father-in-law and brother-in-law also sided with them, rejecting me without any resistance. This went on for several months, until I finally found a way to take revenge on these 4 individuals. My name is Amy, and I am now 27 years old. I am living a peaceful and happy life surrounded by love from my husband, our adorable child, and my parents. The events that led to this began 3 years ago when I was 24. It all started when Ethan, who was my boyfriend at the time, proposed to me. Ethan and I were colleagues at work, and we grew close due to our shared hobby of watching movies. We started dating after going on many movie outings together on our days off. Ethan had a calm and friendly temperament, and he was well liked by many at work. He was the kind of person who disliked conflicts and was always willing to forgive others' mistakes. Since I joined the company, I had been interested in Ethan. So when he asked me out, I was overjoyed and looked forward to going to work every day. Whenever I made a mistake at work and felt down, he would listen to me and offer support. Throughout the entire evening, which lasted a considerable amount of time, my mind naturally began to contemplate the idea of spending an eternity with this individual. Ethan harbored aspirations of establishing his own business in the future, and I desired to be there by his side, offering unwavering support every step of the way. When Ethan proposed to me, my elation knew no bounds. There was absolutely no reason to decline his offer, so I promptly accepted and made the decision to marry Ethan. Following his proposal, we wasted no time in visiting my family's residence. We introduced Ethan to my parents and announced our intentions to marry. To my delight, Ethan exhibited kindness towards my parents and effortlessly connected with my father. It was evident that my parents held a fondness for Ethan, as they joyfully agreed to our union, sharing in our happiness. Observing Ethan engage in pleasant conversation with my parents, I couldn't help but feel incredibly fortunate to have crossed paths with him. The weekend following our visit to my parents, we were scheduled to pay a visit to Ethan's family. It was during a phone conversation the night before that Ethan suddenly mentioned, "Tomorrow, my parents might come across as peculiar, but please don't worry too much about it." Although slightly intrigued by his remark, I brushed it off, assuming that I would find out the following day. After all, Ethan had been living alone for quite some time, and it was likely that he didn't maintain frequent contact with his parents. Rising early the following day, I made the decision not to dwell on it excessively and went to sleep at approximately 10 a.m. the next day. I rendezvoused with Ethan at the train station, and together we made our way to his residence. Since Ethan lived alone, this marked my inaugural visit to his ancestral abode. Despite any claims to the contrary, I felt a sense of unease throughout the morning. As we strolled alongside each other, I could barely hear Ethan's words over the cacophony of my racing heart. Standing before me was a majestic mansion, resembling a castle. The expansive garden left me awestruck, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation as I contemplated Ethan's upbringing in such opulence. However, my nerves were somewhat assuaged when Ethan, wearing his customary gentle smile, asked if I was anxious. He assured me that everything would be fine and encouraged me to proceed. Upon entering through the front door, my mother-in-law greeted me warmly. "Oh my, you've traveled all this way. You must be weary. Come inside quickly," she said kindly. She possessed a slender figure, impeccable makeup, and elegantly styled hair. Her attire, devoid of wrinkles, exuded sophistication. Once inside, I encountered my father-in-law, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, and their children. Everyone, apart from my mother-in-law, greeted me with smiles, which brought me a sense of relief. I was warmly embraced into their midst, taking a seat on the sofa. We engaged in conversation while partaking in a delightful dinner. It was during this time that Ethan announced our engagement. "Oh, Amy, it's been a while. How was the wedding? Did you have a good time?" she asked. "Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't make it because of my trip that day. I meant to buy you a souvenir, but I got so busy and forgot," she said without any hint of remorse. "No, it's okay. I'm glad you enjoyed your trip," I replied, although inside, I felt sadness and wondered why I had to endure such hardship. In order to avoid worsening our connection with Ethan's family, I decided to respond with a forced smile. Ethan expressed his disapproval of canceling the wedding just a day before, especially since all the relatives were absent. He questioned whether this was normal and suggested that if we didn't want to attend, we shouldn't have been invited in the first place. Then his sister-in-law chimed in, stating that she would have attended if I wasn't the bride. I was completely confused by these comments, causing my head to spin. However, before I could respond, Ethan defended me, stating that I hadn't done anything wrong. The mother-in-law then tried to counterattack, expressing her desire to witness her son's special moment, which she claimed was ruined by me. She portrayed herself as a victim and demanded an apology. I was too shocked to respond. Just when tensions were rising, the father-in-law, who had remained silent until now, spoke up and said enough is enough. He berated them for coming into our space on our day off just to complain. He yelled at us with incredible anger and forcefully kicked us out. As I was putting on my shoes at the entrance, I felt a sharp prick on the bottom of my foot. In panic, I lifted my foot and saw a caterpillar crawling inside my shoe. Disgusted, I quickly removed my shoe and let the caterpillar go. The mother-in-law and sister-in-law, who had been observing the situation, asked if I was okay while snickering maliciously. Eager to leave as soon as possible, I apologized for the trouble and hastily departed from the house. My visit to my mother-in-law, Amy, was met with a clear message. She didn't want me involved in her life, except for special occasions. Before I could inquire further, she abruptly shut the door, ending our conversation. I couldn't comprehend what I had done wrong. All I wanted was to have a harmonious relationship with Ethan's family. On our way back home, Ethan kept apologizing to me. He assured me that I didn't have to force myself to interact with his family anymore. He was genuinely sorry. Ethan's mother and sister had even mentioned that they would have attended our wedding if I hadn't been the bride. I felt a sense of guilt, as if I had unknowingly done something wrong. The next day, I woke up to an intense itching sensation all over my body. It was unbearable. I quickly got out of bed and rushed to the mirror, only to discover that my entire body was swollen and fiery red. I was supposed to go to work, but I had to take a sick day and visit the dermatologist. It turned out that the swelling was caused by caterpillar stings, the same caterpillar I encountered the day before. The itching was excruciating, and it persisted for about 2 weeks, making it difficult for me to sleep. Looking back, I remembered seeing my brother-in-law touching my shoes near the front door when I visited Ethan's house. In the past, I would have dismissed it as a harmless incident, assuming that a caterpillar had accidentally crawled into my shoe. However, at that moment, I couldn't help but feel a sense of mistrust towards my in-laws. A month later, Ethan fell ill and had to be hospitalized. I was concerned because he had been expressing frequent stomach discomfort for a week prior to his hospitalization. Therefore, I insisted that he take a day off from work and accompanied him to the hospital. The medical professionals informed us that he likely had a gastric ulcer and required further testing, which necessitated his hospitalization. They advised me to only reach out in case of a wedding or funeral, but I hesitated. However, I concluded that it was important not to keep this information from Ethan's parents, so I mustered up the courage to call my in-laws. When my mother-in-law answered the phone, my hand couldn't stop shaking, and I felt nauseous. As soon as I heard her voice, I realized how much I had grown fond of her. "Hello, it's Amy. I apologize for not keeping in touch. There's something I need to inform you about. Ethan has been hospitalized due to his poor health. They suspect it might be a gastric ulcer, so he is being admitted for tests just to be safe. I thought it was important to let you know." To my surprise, my mother-in-law responded, "Ah, a gastric ulcer, huh? Isn't it because you're overworking him?" She then proceeded to dismiss my concerns, stating that I shouldn't bother her with such trivial matters because she was busy. Feeling hurt and bewildered, I replied, "Trivial matter? Don't you care about Ethan? I don't want to hear your voice if you're going to be like this. Let me make it clear. I no longer wish to have any association with you. Please refrain from contacting me again." Despite her response, my worry for Ethan compelled me to call him directly. Suddenly, my brother-in-law took the phone and said, "Look, you're being too persistent. Read the room a little." I don't know if Ethan has been. After being admitted to the hospital, I found it bothersome to receive any contact from them. Every time they hung up the phone, it felt like something inside me had broken. The relatives who were relentless in their harsh words, including my mother-in-law who explicitly stated not to contact them, even though her own son was hospitalized, and the entire family who unilaterally rejected me. I couldn't forgive them. I didn't want anything to do with that strange family and vowed to never contact them again, no matter what happens. Fortunately, Ethan's test results showed no significant abnormalities after that incident. It turned out he only had a mild gastric ulcer, which he treated with medication. His health improved significantly. Of course, I explained the whole situation to Ethan. With determination in his eyes, he told me that we should stop involving ourselves with his family. The only person that mattered to him now was Amy. If they couldn't accept Amy, then even though we were connected by blood, they weren't family to him. A year later, Ethan finally left his job and fulfilled his long-held dream of starting a software sales business. He had been aspiring to start his own business even before we got married. Leveraging his previous job experience, Ethan worked harder than anyone else to achieve this. Although we were still at the beginning stages, I was thrilled to see him pursue his dreams. Witnessing a glimpse of Ethan's dream coming true brought immense joy to me. His happiness continued to flourish even a year after starting his business when we were blessed with the arrival of a healthy baby boy. My parents were overjoyed at the birth of their grandchild, and despite the nearly 2-hour journey from our house to theirs, they visited us frequently, making each day filled with bliss. Naturally, we didn't inform Ethan's parents about the birth of our child, and even if we had, they probably wouldn't have shown any interest. So it doesn't really matter. We didn't receive any communication from Ethan's parents after that phone call, and it was a relief not to have to deal with that peculiar family anymore. However, several months later, something unexpected occurred. The new coronavirus started to spread globally, and our country declared a state of emergency, urging people to stay at home. As we watched the news, all we saw were discussions about the coronavirus, and the call to refrain from non-essential outings grew louder. It was evident that the restaurant and tourism industries were severely affected, and my heart ached for them. Suddenly, I found myself wondering about the package tour company owned by Ethan's father. But it was none of my concern. In fact, I couldn't help but imagine the state of his father's business, and it might have even brought a smile to my face. Despite the circumstances, Ethan's own business was thriving. While there was some initial instability in our income when we first started our business, recently our earnings have been higher than when Ethan and I was an employee, and everything was going smoothly. During this period, Ethan began receiving numerous phone calls from his parents' residence. However, Ethan appeared to be avoiding any involvement with them and chose not to answer the phone, even when he noticed the calls. There were also some voicemails left, but Ethan decided to ignore them without even listening. I often advised Ethan that he didn't need to worry about me and that it was all right for him to communicate with his family. From my perspective, I disliked his family, but for Ethan, they were the ones who raised him, and I felt guilty for causing him to sever ties with them because of me. However, Ethan told me, as he had mentioned before, that I was the most important person to him, not his parents. If they couldn't accept me, even if they were his parents, he couldn't value them. I felt sorry but also happy for Ethan's unwavering kindness. He continued to receive calls from his father and mother every day, all of which he ignored. Then one day, a letter arrived from Ethan's family home. The letter simply stated that their business was on the brink of bankruptcy, and they had some financial matters they wanted to discuss. They insisted on having an urgent conversation. Of course, we chose not to get in touch. Let him suffer. That's what he deserves. Next thing I knew, my cell phone was ringing. I didn't notice the call as I was at work, But if a voicemail had been kindly left for me, it appeared that Ethan had not been answering his phone. So the caller reluctantly reached out to me instead. It was quite bold, especially considering that I had explicitly told them not to contact me. Despite my reluctance, I decided to listen to the message left on my voicemail. To my surprise, the message simply asked if this was Amy's number and threatened that if Ethan continued to ignore them, they would come knocking. That was all it said. 2 days after the voicemail was left, Ethan had the day off since it was Saturday. We were enjoying a leisurely family day at home, having just finished lunch and discussing our plans for the rest of the day when the doorbell rang. Upon checking the monitor, I saw my 4 in-laws standing there, which left me visibly shocked. Ethan came over to see what was going on and let out a heavy sigh. He told me that we didn't have to answer the door, as they would eventually give up and leave. However, I insisted that it was fine and that we should let them in since they had made the effort to come all this way. Ethan thought for a moment and then agreed, unlocking the door. But there was no way I would ever feel pitiful about such diabolical in-laws. Little did Ethan know, I purposely didn't tell him about the voicemail. All of this was part of my plan to lure them into our home. The shock on my face upon seeing them through the monitor was all an act. I knew they would show up sooner or later. There was a reason why I let Ethan's parents into our house. The real retaliation is yet to come. It's time for a full-scale plan. The entire confrontation began when the extended family of my spouse arrived at our doorstep. Without any hesitation, they entered the house, speaking with frustration and impatience about the time it took to open the door. Their lack of manners was astonishing. Once inside, Ethan's mother noticed our son happily playing with his toys on the floor and asked, "Whose child is this?" I replied, "He's our son." I recalled that they had previously requested not to be contacted, so I hadn't informed them about our child. However, it seemed that their interest was minimal, so whether or not I reported it made no difference. Upon hearing my response, Ethan's mother looked at me disdainfully and muttered under her breath, calling me audacious. I found the situation amusing and decided to engage Ethan's father, asking him why they had come without prior notice if they wanted to visit. Ethan's father replied, "Didn't you read the letter?" I questioned, "Are you referring to the one that arrived 2 days ago?" Angrily, Ethan's father retorted, "If you had read it, you should have contacted us. It stated that we needed to hear from you urgently." Quickly, I responded, "Oh, so you wanted me to reach out, but you previously expressed your desire to have no further involvement with us. Therefore, I didn't think it was necessary." As I observed the stern expressions on all 4 faces, it became challenging for me to suppress my laughter. Ethan, my husband, remained silent, allowing me to express myself freely. It was typical of him to gauge the atmosphere before speaking. It is difficult to believe that he was born to parents who lack such basic intelligence. Then my father-in-law abruptly changed his attitude and began pleading. He begged and apologized for the past, attributing it to the ongoing COVID situation. Due to this pandemic, everyone has been canceling their travel reservations one after another, and we are not receiving any new bookings either. The future of my business seems uncertain, and if this continues, it may be ruined. So can't you assist me financially? In response, I acknowledged the difficulty of the situation, but declined his request. I explained that I didn't want to conveniently help someone who had previously expressed a desire to have nothing to do with me. However, if he was genuinely desperate and showed sincerity, I might reconsider. My father-in-law and others shouted in anger and started intimidating me with furious expressions. But I was no longer scared. I decided to handle the situation in my own way. I didn't insist that they stay. They were free to leave if they wanted to. My father-in-law, looking vexed, slowly started begging and apologizing, pleading for my help. Seeing that I didn't respond immediately, he urged the other 3 to also apologize to me. Finally, all 4 of them began begging. Even with a smile, I politely declined their pleas, saying, "No, thank you." Suddenly, my father-in-law became angry and slammed his hand on the table. He shouted at me, expressing his frustration that I was acting superior while he was humbling himself. He then grabbed my collar. Surprised by his sudden aggression, I was about to tell him to stop when Ethan intervened. He said, "Hey, Dad, don't lay a hand on Amy." My father-in-law's demeanor shifted, and he released his grip. Inquired if you have a preference for supporting your wife when your parents are pleading like this. Ethan responded that Amy is currently the most significant individual to him, and he cannot concern himself with someone who mistreats her, even if they happen to be his parents. He stated that he does not require insincere apologies solely for monetary gain. If there is no genuine apology from the depths of their hearts, he suggested they simply leave. In response, my father-in-law, appearing furious, struck Ethan square in the face. I attempted to say something to my father-in-law, but he remained consumed by anger and proceeded to kick Ethan, who was now on the ground. I shouted, questioning his actions towards Ethan, and tried to restrain my father-in-law from behind. However, he shrugged me off, causing me to be thrown back and hit my head on the corner of the table. As I touched the back of my head, it became apparent that it was covered in blood. The other three individuals, excluding my father-in-law, appeared shocked and frozen in place while witnessing the events unfold. Meanwhile, my father-in-law continued to ransack the room, shouting about the whereabouts of some money. In a state of panic, I swiftly opened the balcony window and called out for help, exclaiming that I was being attacked. 5 minutes later, the police arrived at the scene. Upon their arrival, my father-in-law quickly regained composure and started babbling apologies, claiming that he had become carried away with the excitement of seeing his grandson. He'd also insinuated that I seemed intoxicated due to my erratic behavior and strange utterances. This all began with a flip, and I presented a smile to the police officer, explaining that they should remove this individual from the premises. He had assaulted both my spouse and me, and had also been rummaging through our home, demanding money. Suddenly, my father-in-law exclaimed that he hadn't done anything, and with a curse, he punched a hole in the wall. He was promptly arrested on the spot, and the other three individuals were also taken to the police station for questioning. Later on, it was revealed that my father-in-law had been held in jail for some time. My husband, Ethan, had suffered a punch to the cheek, but fortunately, it was only a minor cut and bruise that healed quickly. On the other hand, the wound on the back of my head turned out to be more significant than I had initially thought, requiring 10 stitches. I feel remorseful for causing Ethan harm by luring my in-laws to our house for revenge, but I am relieved that they have stopped demanding money and seem to regret their actions. From what I later discovered, it was as I had expected. When my in-laws first met me, my father-in-law praised me, which made both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law jealous. It appears that the two of them instructed my father-in-law and brother-in-law to treat me coldly. Naturally, neither my father-in-law nor my brother-in-law could defy them and simply followed their instructions. The caterpillar that ended up in my shoe was likely the doing of my brother-in-law, encouraged by my sister-in-law's jealousy. Jealousy truly is frightening, and it's astonishing how much it can alter someone's life. You never know what may happen afterwards, as I had anticipated. My in-laws had indeed. There is no possibility of acquiring money, as their business went bankrupt and their house was seized. Currently, it appears that they reside in an inexpensive apartment. Both my father-in-law and mother-in-law are approaching the age of 70, making it difficult for them to secure employment once again. My brother-in-law used to work at his father's company, but due to his privileged position as the boss's son, he did not take his job seriously and instead spent his days at the casino. Now, at almost 50 years old and lacking valuable skills, it is challenging for him to find employment. It seems that he is now making a living with a part-time job at a convenience store. My sister-in-law, on the other hand, had been a stay-at-home wife with no significant career. She attempted to find employment through employment agencies, but her selfish personality and constant complaints made it difficult for her to hold down a part-time job for long. Currently, she appears to be confined to her home. Following that incident, my father retired, and we made the decision to live together with my parents. The one who suggested this arrangement was Ethan, my beloved husband, who was concerned about my parents' well-being in their old age. I have returned to work now, and my parents take care of our son during the day, providing me with a sense of security in balancing childcare and work. Life with Ethan, my loving husband, and my kind parents, along with our precious son, is the epitome of happiness for me. I am determined never to forget to express gratitude for this wonderful life form.